Picture this, a lone cowboy riding through the wild frontier when he comes across a woman washing clothes by a river and her dress is torn to pieces. What hardships has she faced? What story hides behind those rags? This is a tale of survival, courage, and quiet strength that will stay with you long after the river fades. Before we start, make sure to subscribe, share this story with your friends, and leave a comment below, because some stories are meant to be witnessed. Now, let's begin this journey. The morning sun had barely begun to stretch its golden fingers across the horizon when the cowboy rode into a part of the territory few travelers ever saw. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine and earth, and the only sound apart from the soft crunch of his horse's hooves on the dirt trail was the distant murmur of a river. The cowboy rode alone, his hat pulled low, shielding his eyes from the sun's glare, and his gaze swept across the landscape with the careful attention of a man who had spent years reading the land like a book. Every ridge, every tree, every flicker of movement told a story to him. That day, however, the land had something different to reveal, something quiet yet impossible to ignore. As he rounded a bend in the trail, the sight of the river ahead stopped him in his tracks, though not by the water itself. It was the figure beside it, bending over the flowing current with the steady movements of someone who had mastered patience, diligence, and survival. She was an Apache woman, her dark hair falling in loose waves around her shoulders, catching the early light in streaks of copper and gold. Her hands moved with practiced rhythm, dipping pieces of clothing into the river, scrubbing them against smooth stones, and wringing them out before placing them carefully to dry on the rocks along the bank. At first glance, the scene seemed serene, almost idyllic, yet it was impossible to ignore the condition of her dress. Torn in countless places, its fragments flapping in the gentle breeze, it told a story of struggle, endurance, and perhaps misfortune. The cowboy felt a strange pull in his chest, a mixture of curiosity and empathy as he slowly guided his horse to a patch of cover nearby. Hidden behind the thick brush, he watched, aware that he was intruding upon a private moment, yet unable to look away. Every movement she made was a testament to resilience. Each careful fold, each deliberate scrub, spoke of someone who had faced hardship but refused to let it break her spirit. Time seemed to stretch as the cowboy observed her, noticing the fine details, the way her hands trembled slightly when wringing out the wet fabric, the faint arch of her back as she leaned over the water, the delicate set of her jaw that spoke of determination. It was clear that she had lived through trials that left marks invisible to the casual observer, scars etched into her very posture and gaze. The river reflected the sun in sparkling patterns across the torn dress, each glint revealing the intricate weaving of fabric now battle-worn and ragged. Yet there was beauty in it still, a stubborn grace that refused to surrender to wear and tear. In that moment, the cowboy realized that what he was seeing was more than laundry being washed. It was life being lived in its rawest, most uncompromising form. He stayed silent, letting the world around them continue as if he were invisible. The sounds of the forest, the gentle rustle of leaves, the occasional call of a bird, the water lapping against the riverbank, created a quiet symphony, framing the scene in a natural serenity that contrasted sharply with the silent tension of two lives intersecting. He could feel the woman's awareness of the space around her, the way she seemed to measure each movement against the environment, aware of potential threats yet not distracted by them. Her eyes, dark and steady, occasionally scanned the surroundings, and for a moment he thought she might sense him, yet she never faltered. She was accustomed to vigilance, to moving through the world with both caution and resolve, and the cowboy understood that her trust was earned, not given lightly. Minutes passed, then stretched into an hour, and the cowboy allowed himself to study the scene in detail. The torn dress, caught in the water's current, became a symbol of endurance, of survival despite the odds stacked high against her. He noticed the small bundle of clothes beside her, carefully arranged, as if each piece had a significance beyond its practical use. Her movements were economical, measured, precise, a rhythm born from necessity and honed by experience. There was a subtle elegance in the way she handled the garments, a balance between strength and delicacy that spoke volumes of her character. He found himself admiring her without intruding, aware that true respect often came from observation rather than interference. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she began to gather the washed clothes, wringing them one last time and stacking them with meticulous care. Each piece was folded and placed as if it were treasure, a testament to a life that valued survival over luxury, resilience over comfort. The torn dress, now mostly dry but still in shreds, seemed almost symbolic, each frayed edge and jagged tear a chapter of a story too long and complex to be summarized in words. The cowboy felt a strange mixture of awe and humility. In that simple act of washing clothes, she revealed a depth of strength that few could imagine. He realized that this woman, despite the hardships, carried herself with dignity, refusing to be defined by the state of her clothing or the challenges of her journey. At last she straightened, standing upright with a quiet grace, her dark eyes scanning the river one last time. There was a fleeting sigh, soft but audible, a whisper that spoke of fatigue, of solitude, and perhaps of hope. The cowboy exhaled slowly, understanding that this was not a scene to interrupt with words or gestures. Some moments, he knew, were meant to be observed, felt, and respected from a distance. He shifted slightly, revealing himself just enough that she might see him but not feel threatened. The rustle of leaves caught her attention, and her gaze lifted, meeting his for the first time. There was no panic, no immediate alarm, just a cautious recognition of another presence in the wild. "Morning," he said, his voice calm and steady, carrying over the gentle sound of the river without disturbing its rhythm. Her eyes narrowed for a brief moment, calculating, measuring whether he was friend or foe, but there was no fear in her stance, only awareness. Slowly she nodded, acknowledging his presence, her voice soft yet firm as she replied, "Morning." There was a pause, a quiet moment suspended between them, filled only with the murmur of the river and the rustle of the forest. The cowboy tipped his hat, a gesture of respect that needed no explanation. She returned the motion, small but deliberate, and in that silent exchange, a bridge formed between two strangers whose lives had otherwise followed separate paths. There was understanding in their shared glance, an unspoken agreement that some things required no words, only recognition and respect. He watched as she began to collect the fragments of her torn dress, folding them with care, and he felt a profound respect for the woman before him. She was not asking for assistance, nor did she expect it. Her independence was absolute, her strength unquestionable. Every movement, every deliberate action reinforced the truth that survival on the frontier was not just a physical challenge, but a test of character, resilience, and determination. In that moment, the cowboy knew he had witnessed something rare and remarkable. He had seen courage not in grand gestures or heroic battles, but in the quiet, meticulous care with which someone managed the remnants of a life shaped by hardship. The river continued its flow, indifferent yet constant, carrying away the smallest fragments of her life while leaving behind the essence of her strength. The cowboy remained silent, absorbing the lesson the woman imparted without realizing it. It was a story of resilience, dignity, and the quiet power of endurance, a story written not in words, but in actions, in the way someone navigates the relentless demands of life while refusing to be diminished by them. As the morning sunlight grew stronger, illuminating the river and the woman standing beside it, the cowboy felt a sense of connection, fragile yet undeniable. Two lives, intersecting for a fleeting moment, each carrying stories untold, each bearing scars and triumphs unique to their own journey. The river flowed on, as it always had, and as it always would, witnessing the unspoken narrative of survival, courage, and quiet strength. The cowboy finally nudged his horse, signaling that he would continue on his path, but he did so with a deep respect for the woman who had shared this space with him, even unknowingly. There was no need for words beyond what had already passed between them. Some stories, he knew, were meant to be experienced, observed, and carried within the heart, their lessons lasting longer than any spoken conversation. With one last glance at the river, at the torn dress, at the woman whose quiet strength had left an indelible mark, he rode forward, feeling the weight and the wonder of the moment linger with him. The journey continued, as all journeys do, but the memory of the river, the woman, and her torn yet resilient dress would remain, a testament to the quiet power of endurance in a world that often demanded more than it gave. The cowboy rode slowly, the rhythm of his horse's hooves a quiet accompaniment to his thoughts. The memory of the woman by the river lingered in his mind, sharper than any image he had seen in years on the frontier. There was a strength in her presence that commanded respect without demanding it, a resilience born of hardship yet tempered by grace. As he followed the trail along the riverbank, he kept a careful distance, curious yet unwilling to intrude. Something told him their paths were meant to cross again, though neither could have predicted how that meeting might unfold. Hours passed as he wound through narrow ravines and open meadows, the sun climbing higher, casting long shadows across the land. The cowboy was a man familiar with solitude, accustomed to the vastness of the frontier, yet the encounter at the river left him unsettled in a way he had not felt in years. The image of her torn dress, floating in the current, stayed with him, not as a symbol of loss, but as a reminder that endurance often went unnoticed, that courage could be quiet and unassuming, yet more powerful than any act of bravado. By mid-afternoon, he came upon a small clearing where the river curved gently, forming a natural pool. The water shimmered in the sunlight, and he slowed his horse, sensing movement ahead. There she was again, kneeling by the river's edge, carefully adjusting the bundle of clothes she carried. Her eyes lifted briefly as she sensed him, but there was no fear, only acknowledgement. This time, however, there was a subtle change, a softness, a curiosity, as if she were willing to share more than the brief moment of morning observation had allowed. The cowboy dismounted and approached slowly, leaving his horse tied to a nearby tree. Every step he took was measured, deliberate, showing respect for her space and for the world she had carved out for herself. "I didn't mean to intrude," he said, his voice low and steady. "I just saw you earlier, and I reckon I couldn't help but notice you working." Her gaze met his, calm and unwavering. "You watched," she said simply, a statement rather than a question. There was no accusation in her voice, only recognition. "I don't mind, I suppose. Most wouldn't notice, and even fewer would respect it." The cowboy nodded. "Respect comes easy when it's earned," he replied, allowing a small smile to touch his lips. "And you've earned plenty, from what I can see." A faint laugh escaped her, soft and melodic, carrying across the water. "That dress," she said, gesturing toward the remnants of the torn fabric, "it's a reminder that things break, that life takes more than it gives sometimes, but it doesn't mean you stop moving forward." He studied her closely, noting the way her fingers absently traced the folds of the bundle, the quiet determination in her posture, and the unspoken strength in her eyes. "I reckon you've learned more than most ever will," he said, his voice tinged with admiration. "And yet, here you are still standing, still carrying on." She nodded, her expression distant yet thoughtful. "Life doesn't give you much choice out here. You either endure or you disappear. I've chosen to endure." There was a silence between them then, filled only by the murmuring river and the occasional bird call. It was the kind of silence that could speak volumes, the kind that conveyed understanding without words. And in that silence, the cowboy felt a connection, fragile yet undeniable, formed not from romance or grand gestures, but from shared acknowledgement of what it meant to survive in a world that rarely offered mercy. Finally, she broke the silence. "You're a cowboy, aren't you?" she asked, her voice steady yet curious. He nodded, tipping his hat slightly. "I am. Been riding these trails for longer than I care to count. Seen plenty of things, met plenty of people, but it's rare I come across someone like you." Her eyes softened, though her posture remained strong. "And yet, here we are, two wanderers, crossing paths for a moment in time." The cowboy considered this, then took a seat on a nearby rock, careful not to crowd her space. "Funny how the world works that way," he said. "Sometimes. It gives you more than you expect, if you're paying attention." She allowed a small smile, and for the first time, he noticed the subtle lines around her eyes, signs of a life filled with experience and hardship. "I suppose that's true," she replied, "but attention alone isn't enough. You have to act, to endure, to carry on even when everything seems against you." The cowboy felt the weight of her words, their resonance echoing through his own experiences. He had faced danger, isolation, and hardship in equal measure, and yet he recognized the difference between surviving and truly enduring. This woman embodied endurance. She carried it in her movements, in the way she balanced strength and care, in the quiet dignity that refused to be shaken by circumstance. As the afternoon wore on, They talked, slowly, carefully, sharing fragments of their lives without overstepping boundaries. The woman spoke of nights under the stars, of dangers faced alone, of rivers crossed and mountains climbed. The cowboy shared tales of trails ridden, storms weathered, and the solitude that came with living on the edge of civilization. In each exchange, they found common ground, not in the details of their experiences, but in the resilience required to navigate a world that often demanded more than it gave. Eventually, the woman stood, gathering her bundle of clothes. The torn dress was neatly folded on top, a symbol of her past trials carefully managed rather than discarded. "I have to go," she said, her voice calm yet resolute. "The land waits for no one, and I have my path to follow." The cowboy stood as well, tipping his hat once more. "I'll not forget this meeting," he said. "You've shown me something most never see. Strength isn't always loud, and endurance isn't always visible. Sometimes it's quiet, and it's all the more remarkable for it." She allowed herself a faint nod, a gesture of acknowledgement and respect. "And I will remember you too, cowboy. A witness is sometimes all a story needs to carry on." With that, she disappeared into the trees, her figure gradually blending with the wilderness, leaving only the river and the gentle sound of flowing water behind. The cowboy watched her go, feeling a mixture of admiration and reflection. The encounter had been brief, yet its impact would last. He had seen courage, resilience, and dignity personified, and it had reminded him of the quiet power of observation, respect, and understanding. Mounting his horse, he gave the reins a gentle nudge and rode forward along the trail. The sun was lowering in the sky, casting long golden shadows across the land. The memory of the river, the torn dress, and the woman's quiet strength followed him, a reminder that not all heroes carried guns or rode into battle. Some simply endured, and in doing so, shaped the world around them. As the cowboy rode into the fading light, he reflected on the lessons of the day, that strength could be silent, that resilience often went unseen, and that true courage sometimes lay in the quiet acts of survival. The frontier was vast and unforgiving, but it was also filled with stories like hers, waiting to be witnessed by those patient enough to see, respectful enough to watch, and wise enough to learn. And in that understanding, the cowboy felt a sense of completion. The encounter by the river had been more than a chance meeting. It had been a lesson in endurance, dignity, and the profound strength hidden in the simplest of acts. He would carry that lesson with him across the plains, over mountains, and along rivers yet to come, a reminder that the frontier's greatest stories were not always shouted in saloons or etched in gunfire, but quietly lived by those who refused to be broken. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in deep oranges and purples, and the cowboy continued his journey, the river fading from view but never from memory. And somewhere in the wilderness, the Apache woman moved onward as well, carrying her bundle, her torn dress, and her unyielding spirit, a testament to survival, courage, and the quiet, indomitable strength of the human heart.